Forum Borealis Paradigm Expansion.
Greetings from the north and very welcome to Forum Borealis and a brand new episode in our series From Solomon's Temple to Arcadia. And today we have an exceptional show for you. A three-parter actually, although I intended it as a single show. Once the discussion started, it just unraveled into profound rabbit holes, and even the 5 hours committed doesn't do proper justice to the subject matters dealt with, which is why we have a series in the first place. So you can be certain we will revisit many of these topics with today's guests, as well as others who has done significant work in this field. Now, at first glance, the topic of Norsemen and Templars in America may seem like a somewhat trivial peculiarity for history nerds, but beware that all the implications raised pulls strings in all sorts of directions, notwithstanding history-shattering revelations. In particular, I recommend Part 2, where some outstanding new info is shared, which in due course will be found in several future books. But in Part 1 we start with the beginnings and take on the Kensington Runestone, its context, implications and relations, which works as a key of sorts to the greater mystery, followed up in Part 2, where we deal with the whos, whence and whys, and spill the beans from hermetically sealed documents, which makes fiction look boring. And finally, in Part 3 we touch upon the more spiritual aspects of this saga, especially through the mysteries of the runes and the heresy of everyone the Vatican devoted centuries to destroy. Our guide through this rollercoaster ride is none other than Scott Wolter, scientist, author and TV host. Son of a pilot and descending from several prominent lineages, including the Merovingians and the Sinclairs, he was born at winter solstice in 1958 in Florida, but moved early on to Minnesota, where he married his wife and spiritual companion, Janet, in 86, herself an author in her own right. By education, he is a forensic geologist certified from the University of Minnesota Duluth in 1982. As a lifelong esteemed scientist, he's made several significant contributions to the field and spent years conducting research and creating dating processes to learn more about ancient artifacts, and shared his expertise with the world through publications and media. He's the inventor of archaeopetrography, I probably butchered the term, which is a process used to date and understand the origins of stone artifacts. He's been the principal petrographer in more than 5,000 investigations throughout the US, Canada and Puerto Rico, including the evolution of fire-damaged concrete at the Pentagon following the attacks of September 11. As an expert in the scientific handling of concrete, he was also present to help out analyzing the concrete remains of the World Trade Center, and has even helped the Las Vegas police investigate a homicide where a victim was found buried in concrete. In addition to investigating and dating ancient artifacts in criminal cases, Wolter has been president of American Petrographic Services since 1990. He is responsible for the independent petrographic analysis testing laboratory where the Kensington Runestone was brought for investigation in the year 2000. His first big screen appearance was as a Kensington Runestone expert on the documentary Holy Grail in America, and later became the host of the popular documentary TV series America Unearthed, airing at Travel Channel and History International, where we follow him on his quest to uncover the truth behind historic artifacts and sites found throughout North America and around the world. Although embracing many different subjects, several episodes are based upon his own research as well as many other veterans of the field, tangenting some of the subject matters we explore in this and other of our forum series. Spiritually, he is affiliated with several esoteric groups, in particular Masonic and Knights Templar orders. More or less a natural result of where his research has taken him. Scott has authored several books on geology, the Knights Templar, and theories related to pre-Colombus contact. Part 1 touches upon stuff from his book, The Kensington Runestone, Compelling New Evidence, co-authored with a prominent runologist Dr. Richard Nielsen. Part 2 is relating material from his future book as well as the recent Akhenaton to the Founding Fathers, The Mysteries of the Hooked X, plus some of the stuff in his other books. And part 3 is more connected to his books, The Hooked X, Key to the Secret History of North America, and Cryptic Code of the Templars in America, Origins of the Hooked X. Prepare yourself for a parachute dive with part 2 as the actual jump. In Scott Wolter's own words, the history that we were all taught growing up is wrong. There's a hidden history that few knows about. There are pyramids here, chambers, tombs, inscriptions. They're all over this country. We're going to investigate these artifacts and sites, and we're gonna get to the truth. Sometimes history isn't what we've been told. Welcome to Forum Borealis, Scott.
Thank you.
And thank you for agreeing to coming on. You know your work, what little I know about it, because full disclosure, people, unfortunately this is one of these guests where I haven't read the books. But, like I told you before we started, I've seen some of your media work, at least.
All right.
And that work fits so very well into this series we're having. This series, we're calling it From Solomon's Temple, from Arcadia. From Solomon's Temple to Arcadia.
Wow. Very good, very good.
Yeah. And in that series, we've had a friend of yours on, Timothy Hogan.
Oh, yes, I know Tim quite well. I've known him for many years. He's a really good person and one of the most knowledgeable people in the subject matter. I think that you're Solomon to Arcadia. That Tim would be a good one.
Yeah, and we did, for example, one on the Templars. But the problem with Tim is that someone should, for Christmas, buy him proper equipment, because the sound always sucks when we have him on, unfortunately.
All right, I'll have to needle him on that when next time I talk to him.
But you coming off here now very well, but no wonder, because you're also involved in TV. We'll get back to all that stuff later.
Okay, very good. And where do you live?
I'm Norwegian.
All right, you live in Norway. Okay, well, I spend a lot of time in Sweden.
Oh.
Because that's where most of the runes, the dialect, the grammar, the dating, the dialect features that are found on the runestone. We found everything,
right,
in medieval inscriptions, primarily in Sweden and specifically on Gotland.
Yeah, Gotland. Mm.
Yeah,
interesting. Well, we'll get to that too. Now, so the reason I have you on is basically your work, and I want to start with the beginning, basically, both in terms of how you, I'm assuming, stumble into this scene, yeah, but also in terms of the timeline here, and that is the famous, or maybe I should say the infamous, Kensington Runestone. Now, before you begin explaining to us, I just want to, for those who don't know, I want to say it's a discovery that was made in USA, and Scott will get back to the details around it. But yeah, the problem is, I've heard so many things. First they say, wow, yeah, look at what we found. Oh, it's genuine. And then, no, it's not genuine after all. Oh, it's genuine after all. And it's like back and forth.
Right.
So I want you to give you the opportunity to clarify where we're standing on that. And also, just assume those who listen don't even know what it's all about. What's all the fuss about?
Right. Well, let me just give you a brief synopsis of what it is. And in the fall of 1898, a Swedish immigrant farmer by the name of Olaf Ullman was clearing trees in preparation for farming on his 100-acre parcel of land up in greater Minnesota, near Alexandria, Minnesota, in a little town called Kensington. And he and his two oldest sons were clearing trees, and this one tree that was estimated to be 25 to 30 years old, they cut off the roots around the base of the tree, and then they took a winch and they tipped it over, which pulled the stump out of the ground at the same time, right? But almost directly under the tree, tightly wrapped in the roots that were still there, was this 202-pound rectangular-shaped stone, which I might add was exactly a 2-to-1 ratio. It had been intentionally split down from a larger slab of rock, and a long inscription carved in Scandinavian runes comprised of 9 lines of text on the face side and 3 lines of text on the side. Now, I have come to realize that all of this information is important, but none of this was discussed back at the time it was discovered. Well, obviously, there was a lot of excitement in the community, and early on, scholars at the University of Minnesota saw the stone, and they recognized some of the runes. They didn't recognize a lot of the other symbols, none of the numbers, and quickly concluded that it was a hoax, and blamed the farmer for carving it.
When was this again, the year?
This was in 1898, and then the first scholars looked at it early in 1899.
So 100 years has passed.
120.
More than 100 years. And the scholars are still as arrogant as ever. They were just as arrogant back then as they are now, obviously.
Oh.
We don't know about it, therefore it doesn't exist. It's amazing, huh?
Well, your comment about arrogance, and let's back up for a second and realize that it's easy to criticize people that you don't agree with by calling them names and dismissing them out of hand. And we've certainly seen an awful lot of that in our country and on the larger stage. Yeah. And it just doesn't work. But one of the things that I have concluded during my time is what I call problems of the human condition. Have been really the nemesis of the Kensington Runestone and many other controversial artifacts and sites for centuries. I mean, not just with the runestone, but arrogance is one of the problems. And essentially, what the attitude was for the last 120 years, it's still going on to this day. Within certain elements of academia is, well, if I'm the world's expert in this information, and if I can't figure it out, then there must be something wrong with it. Therefore, they dismiss it.
Exactly. And I just, to pitch in, I think it's worse in the so-called soft sciences, especially archaeology. You know Graham Hancock, right?
Oh, sure. I know Graham quite well, yeah.
And you know his battles with Egyptologists. Those people are religious fanatics, man. It's better with geologists. By the way, aren't you a geologist?
I am.
Yeah.
I am.
Those tend to be more,
I'm a forensic geologist.
Sorry, what's that?
I'm a forensic geologist.
Wow, even better.
I do material forensics for a living. I've done it this will be my 35th year coming up. And basically I investigate mostly in the construction industry with concrete and rock, right? So if there's a problem with say low strength or early cracking or a catastrophic failure or something is not going right with concrete, and concrete is a man-made rock, right? Yeah. They will call me to come in and try to figure out what caused the particular problem, and then of course the next question is who's going to pay, right? Whose fault is it? So I get involved in a lot of litigation. So I understand this process of gathering evidence, making interpretations, and then, if appropriate, drawing a conclusion. But there are many times, I shouldn't say many times. It actually doesn't happen that often. But there are times when you either don't have enough information or you just are unable to reach a definitive conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, you are obligated
to suspend judgment. Yes.
You just have to say, I don't know.
Yep.
And that's okay. I mean,
that's not just okay. That's scientific.
That's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah. And I am assuming this credential is how you got involved with the stone, because you would be the perfect guy to take a look at it.
Well, that's exactly right. In fact, the Runestone Museum hired a person who went to the University of Minnesota Duluth, which is where I studied in college. And the professors there in the geology department said the guy that you need is Scott Wolter. So they put him in touch with me, and I remember when I sat down with this guy, and he started talking about the runestone, and I had never heard of it, which looking back is almost ironic, because it's arguably the most well-known historical mysterious artifact in the world. I mean, it's found in Minnesota, and I lived most of my life here. I tell people, I said, look, I must have missed school that day. I don't know what you're talking about.
No, but wasn't the judgment back in the day that it was a fake, and therefore there was no more fuss about it?
It's a hoax, yeah.
For 100 years?
But I didn't know any of that. I knew nothing about that. And,
okay.
It was pretty clear that this guy was an advocate for authenticity, right? And my spidey sense tickled a little bit, and so I gave him the speech that I give to a lot of my customers. I say, look, I'll be happy to do this work for you, but you need to be prepared that I may come back and give you news you're not going to like. And you're still going to pay me, okay? Because the beautiful thing is, it doesn't matter what the results are. I get paid either way. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful thing. So I gave him that speech, and he said, okay, and away we went. So I went into this thing without any prior knowledge, and quite frankly, Al, it wouldn't have made any difference, but the truth is, I knew nothing about it, and I started with a blank slate, as I do with all my work, and I let the evidence drive the investigation.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that we were ultimately able to let the rock tell us what it was. And this is one of the things that I came to realize about the runestone and the problem. And I think you'll like this. Okay, you ready for this?
Mm-hmm.
For 120 years now, 121 years, academics have been trying to tell the Kensington Runestone what it's supposed to be instead of letting the artifact tell them what it is.
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense, because we're so used to this in so many areas now.
Yes.
It's amazing. I guess that's what you Americans call when the tail wags the dog. Kind of.
You hit the nail on the head perfectly. Yeah. Yep. But it's surprising because, and I don't want to get too much into politics, but what we're seeing in Washington D.C. right now with Trump and the impeachment hearings and, fake news and the FBI is the deep state. I mean, it's so much of it is just absolute nonsense and outright lies. It's really depressing, to be honest with you, to America,
But it is, Scott. But I suggest that another approach, and that's that if you're old enough to remember how it was before the internet.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of good in a way, because it's so apparent and people are waking up. And, back in the day, people were much more naive. The deep state has been there forever, right?
Right, yeah.
But now we know now everybody can see the charade.
Yeah.
And that makes us...
in a way, I think you're right. And I think that when this all blows over, because it will eventually, hopefully sooner than later, I think we will learn a lot. And I think it'll be more difficult going forward for this crap to go on, or more difficult anyway. I mean, but before they just got away with it. There was no checks and balances. There was no way to research it. And the internet has changed the world, obviously, for the good, and I would argue for the bad as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've changed it. I think it records much of the bad. The bad has been there all the time, We didn't become bad because of the internet.
Yeah, you're right.
But it makes everything visible. But I say the rot that is so displayed in politics and in media is kind of also infecting academia. And
I agree. I
experienced this firsthand.
Oh, yes, I have. The funny thing was, and I want to go back and just say, when I did this work, I had all kinds of people trying to talk to me. And I'm like, why are these people talking to me? And it's like, just get out of here. Let me do my work and we'll talk later. Mm-hmm. And, I say to people, and they kind of laugh at this, but it's really true. I trust rocks. I don't trust some people. Mm. Rocks have never lied to me. They always tell the truth, and they don't have an agenda. They don't have egos. They just are. And so the rock told me, after I did my relative age weathering study by comparing the weathering of the inscription with the weathering of carved tombstones of known age, and it told me that it was centuries old. Hmm. And at that point, it was really boiled down to logic, because really the question was, it's either a late 19th century hoax or it's not, right? Mm. So what else do you have? Well, it's either genuine or it's not.
So the only reason they thought it was ingenuine was because they didn't recognize some of the signs and symbols.
That was part of it. That's it wasn't just that simple. Mm-hmm. And I can explain to you really what was one of the key things that was a problem. But just getting back to the point I was trying to make is the weathering was centuries old. Therefore, it eliminated the possibility of a hoax. Therefore, the only possibility is it had to be genuine. Mm. Once I said that, and I came out and said it was genuine, and I wrote it in my report, and I published it. I mean, I gave it to the Runestone Museum, and they made it public. Mm. I received this wave of criticism.
Yeah, all hell broke loose, right? And they even attacked you personally, didn't they?
All hell broke loose, and I'm like, what the hell's going on here? I had no idea, but I pretty quickly I figured it out. So at that point, quite frankly, I got pissed off.
Yeah, of course.
And I said, okay, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I could not understand where the pushback was. And make no mistake, Al, I'm not above making a mistake or an error. Mm-hmm. And by God, if I've made an error, I want to know about it because I'll fix it. Okay. Mm. But the pushback I got, they weren't asking about, the weathering study. They weren't asking about the minerals. They weren't asking about the work, about the work I did. They just didn't like the results. I'm sorry.
And that's when they have to resort to smears.
Well, look, if you can't attack the evidence, you attack the person, right?
Mm. I mean, kill the messenger.
Yeah, kill the messenger, of course. And that's what prompted me to go, okay, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. So at that point, I used simple logic, right? And here's the logic. If this thing is genuine, that means somebody carved it. They came from some place for some reason. Those are absolute truths if this thing is authentic. Mm. So I just simply followed the evidence trail. And at that point, starting in 2003, the runestone came into my lab in 2000. I made 5 trips in 2.5 years to Sweden, and I found everything. All the language, the runes, the dialect and grammar. And the reason I took those trips is because the rock told me it was real. Therefore, everything in that inscription must be medieval.
Must be recorded somewhere, yes.
Has to be there. And guess what? It was. Of course, all that did was just piss off the academics even more because I had the audacity to go in their backyard and find what they were too lazy to look for.
Exactly.
Why?
Because it wasn't just...
Because they'd already reached a conclusion.
Yes, but hang on. It wasn't just the Minnesotan university that had...
No.
Dismissed it. Even Swedish academicians had done this, right?
Oh, yeah. They were the loudest complainers.
They were the worst. And you know why? Because they they have vested interests because this is supposed to be their expertise, their line of expertise.
Absolutely.
Let me tell you about a doctor who was Swedish, who was called Sigurd Agrell.
Okay.
Do you know him?
I do not.
He lived 100 years ago.
Nope.
Well, he was a top-notch academic who specialized in runes and Norse.
Oh, what was his name?
Sigurd Agrell.
Oh, yeah, I know. Yes, I have heard that name. Yes.
He made some excellent books. The problem is that he experienced the same thing as you. They didn't like his work, so they tried to smack him down, and that was much easier 100 years ago than today because we have internet today, right?
Well, that's part of the saving grace of the internet, yes.
Yeah. So I think, I don't know too much about his bio, but I have a notion that he was like bitter and forlorn at the end. But
right.
He did some great work, and the friends I have who are into runes, like, you know, for spiritual purposes, they hold him in high esteem because,
sure.
because he discovered a lot of stuff that goes against the academic mainstream. And what you have to understand here, folks, is that on this area, as in almost all areas, there will always be this establishment who degenerates into dogmatism and religion, right?
Absolutely.
I say religion, but what I mean is a faith-based system.
No, the word is religion. It's a faith. It's a belief.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it is, dogma is absolutely the right word. And it was something that I had never been exposed to, and it was quite shocking. But look, I don't even worry about it anymore because I realize now that you know, if you're going to make a difference, it's not going to be an easy road. You're going to have pushback, and if you don't get pushback, then you're not doing something right. Is the way I look at it now.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good point. All these haters tells me I've done something right.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's backtrack.
And that's why I say to people, I go, just go on the internet, Google my name. You'll find there's people that dedicate, you know, a big part of their lives to attacking me. Well, that means I'm onto something. That's the way I look at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, instead of trying to prove, instead of spending that energy for research, is amazing.
Exactly.
And by the way, Scott, you know, they're very fond of using the word conspiracy theory, these pseudo-skeptics, but they are the ones who jump to it, because when they claim that the runestone is a hoax, for example, I mean, why do they even turn to words like hoax?
Yes.
Because something can be not real without being manufactured with deceit in mind. And I'm not saying this about the runestone, of course. I'm just saying every time they think something isn't real, they go to the hoax explanation. And that's a conspiracy theory.
For sure,
That's exactly the definition of a conspiracy theory.
Well, you're right. And you know what it is? It's when it doesn't even have any resemblance of some type of a dignified response. I mean, you can disagree with something and still be somewhat dignified, right? I mean, to come up with the most radical hyperbole you can think of, and it's, you know, it's first of all, it's unnecessary, let alone not true. But it's like, why do you have to go to such extremes to try to make your point, right?
Yeah.
And this is also what skeptics do. You know, they call it a hoax. Well, suddenly by saying it's a hoax, which you're implying that somebody created this with the intention to deceive.
Exactly.
How the hell would you know that? You wouldn't know that.
No. You need evidence to back up such a hypothesis, which they don't have. Now, even most skeptics even agree that the chap who discovered the stone couldn't have perpetrated any.
And you know what? As an investigator, when you take Olof Oman out of the picture, now you really are stretching it. Because I said from the very beginning, when I first was getting my head around the history of this thing, I said, well, if there's a hoax going on, this guy's involved somehow, some way. And I said that from the very beginning. Well,
you mean the discoverer, Olaf?
Olof Oman.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I mean, he's got to be involved. I mean, you know, he didn't find somebody else's practical joke under the roots of a tree, right?
But it's impossible that he was involved in anything like this.
Exactly.
And even the skeptics concede that.
Well, yeah. I mean, at this point, it's ridiculous to even make such a claim. But look, there's no reason to even talk about it. The runestones.
Nobody earned money on it. Nobody got famous for it. Nobody had any personal incentive whatsoever or ideological. Because the big deal came much later. Because in the beginning they thought it was unauthentic, right?
Right.
Very early on.
At the very outset, people, they didn't know what it was. I mean, there was no reason to question it until Olaus Breda was the first scholar at the University of Minnesota to weigh in on it. And for crying out loud, he didn't even understand what the numbers were. I mean, if you look at his early translation, which I have, and it's published in my first runestone book, he didn't even know what they were. So he had an incomplete translation, and he screwed up the translation on top of it. And I mean, there's no way I would have drawn any conclusion without understanding everything that was in there, right?
No.
Question marks? I can't write a final report when I have nothing but question marks.
Yeah. And nobody made money from this, right?
No. Well, the only guy that made money was, he never got his money either, Helmer Holland, but we knew that he wasn't part of it. He never purchased the stone from Olaf Oman. Olaf Oman gave it to him and said, after you're done studying it, give it to he said the Norwegian Historical Society. There was no such thing at the time. He meant the Minnesota Historical Society. But in any case, Helmer Holland didn't do that. He got it from him in 1907, and then in 1908 or 1909, he offered it to the Minnesota Historical Society for $5,000. You know how much money that would be back then?
Yeah, lots.
Millions in today's dollars. But anyway,
they didn't pay him.
No. There was an investigation, and that's when Winchell got involved. And
so this chap Hjalmar tried to make money out of it.
He tried to make money, but it never panned out.
But Olaf certainly would have no competence to do something like this.
No.
What about this Hjalmar dude? Was he refined enough?
Helmer Holland was a scholar. Yeah, he wrote. I think I've got all seven of his books. And he fought for its authenticity. Now, looking back, he
fought for the authenticity. Interesting.
He was for authenticity, absolutely. Right. He believed it was real.
But was he involved in the discovery process?
No. What happened was Olaf Oman found it in 1898, and then it was sent to be studied in 1899. Went to Minnesota. And Olaus Breda looked at it, and he couldn't figure it out. He said, this is a clumsy hoax. And that set a very important precedent, right? Because he was a respected scholar. But really what he did was was fraud, essentially. I mean, if you don't even know what the characters are, how can you evaluate it? How can you say, right? Yeah. But anyway, so then it was returned to Olaf Oman, and he put it in the shed, and it was there for the next 10 years. until August of 1907, when Helmer Holland was doing research, and he was traveling in the counties up there, talking to Norwegian immigrants for his book that he eventually did write about Norwegian settlement. And he was talking to somebody, and they said, you should go talk to Olaf Oman. He's got a stone that has, Norse writing on it. And so he went and saw him, and he looked at the stone. He recognized they were runes, and then he tried to buy it. And Olaf said, no, it's not for sale, but if you want to take it and study it, make sure it ends up in the Minnesota Historical Society. Okay. Well, and then, the rest is history after that. So,
but let's backtrack to the stone then. Sure. So here you are. They called you in. You take a look at it. I think it was an advantage that you didn't know. At least it's an advantage in terms of nobody can claim that, but they used a researcher who was positively biased, right?
No, they absolutely. Well, the truth is, Al, even if I had heard about it, it wouldn't have made a difference, but I guess it was that I didn't know what they were talking about.
Yeah, for your attitude and work. Right. But then they could have said, like, if you have heard about it, they could have said, like, he was...
they would have said it. Now I realize they would have said it.
They would have, exactly. So they didn't get that one at least. So my point is just that's an advantage. So there you are. You find out this thing is real, and then you ask the basic questions that you posed 5 minutes ago. Now, where do you go from here?
Well, okay. So I go to Sweden, and we find everything. Now, what was really, really important is that, and I was working with. At the time, I was working with the person who is now considered in Sweden the top runologist in the world, Professor Henrik Williams, and another engineer and a scientist by the name of Richard Nielsen. He and I co-authored a book, my first book on the runestone, called The Kensington Runestone, Compelling New Evidence, 574 pages. And it was those two guys working in conjunction with them where I learned about runes and language and dialect and grammar and all of this. I mean, I don't consider myself...
So these two chaps were mainstream Swedish scholars?
Yes.
And they backed your work?
Well, but Dick was an American, Henrik was Swedish. But Henrik had a lot of respect for Dick, because Dick was a basic, pardon my verbiage, but he was an anal retentive engineer. And he dug into the old Swedish diplomas that I remember Henrik saying at one point. He said, we don't even want to read those things because they're so boring. But Dick was had the dog determination to dig into these things. And he found many of these rare medieval language features that are found on the runestone and were unknown previously. So
Dick, who is Dick?
Dick Nielsen. Dick has passed away a couple of years ago, but he was the person who had studied the Kensington Runestone for 25 years before he contacted me.
So he was he's an American, and he was one of these Kensington people.
And he was probably the most knowledgeable person in the world at that time on the Kensington Runestone. And even though Dick and I eventually had a falling out, I will never criticize the work that he did, the discoveries that we made together. And it really was the collaboration of the disciplines. Yeah. Me as a geologist and a forensic scientist, and Henrik and Dick as runologists.
So Henrik is a Swedish runologist, and
Henrik Williams.
Richard is an American.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So the three of us really did this work, but and there was so many good things that happened. But what I learned from them was that in medieval times, the only person that could have carved an inscription of this complexity and length had to have been a member of the clergy, because the common people weren't educated in the 14th century, right?
Okay, so we have to date the runestone now.
Yeah, I was just going to say the runestone's dated 1362.
Yeah, right. I saw that in the movie Holy Grail in America, where
Correct.
You are heavily figuring. By the way, folks, watch that movie, because it illuminates so much of what our series is touching upon too. And it's a great movie, or documentary, I should say.
Yeah. That's a movie. We saw it when the movie premiered. We went to a movie theater and watched it and had a party. It was just a grand event, and it really did well. And even after, my gosh, it's been over 10 years, maybe 11 years now. It was a good effort, and the production company did a great job, and History supported us, History Channel, and
they aired it there. Who was the production company?
Committee Films, and they're located literally 5 minutes from my house.
Oh, okay.
In fact, when I met them, this is how this movie came about. Mm-hmm. I was actually in my office. I was working on a murder case. And it got some attention because some of the work we did with the concrete, a murder victim had been found buried in a shallow grave in the desert outside of Las Vegas.
Jeez.
Totally encased in concrete.
Wow.
So what they asked us to do was to try and age date the concrete using our forensic techniques and to try to establish a time of death so they could identify the victim.
Just out of fun, if a corpse is completely enveloped by concrete, Wouldn't that slow down the decay?
Yes, it would. However, this person was not 100% totally encased. There were gaps in the side because there were multiple placements of concrete. And they placed it with such a low slump. It was so stiff when they placed it, it didn't consolidate. So this allowed air to get in, and this was all part of the analysis that caused the decomposition. And it also produced some carbonation and some chemical reactions in the concrete that actually were time dependent. And so I was able to use those chemical reactions as a clock. And actually they were able to identify the victim. And when they did finally establish a time of death, it matched almost perfectly with the number I gave them. So
nice.
It was. I remember talking to him, and I said, "Jesus Christ, this stuff actually works." But in any case, Maria Oz, whose husband was the person who was just starting this production company. She was an investigative reporter with a local television station, and she came to interview me about the murder case. And she walked into my office. Well, I had just come back from, I think, my last trip to Sweden doing the research on the runestone, and I had this poster of this special exposition that of the runestone that occurred when we were there. And she looked at it and she saw the runestone. She said, "Oh, have you done work on the Kensington Runestone?"
So she was one of the locals who were educated on their own mysteries.
She knew about it. And I just looked at her. I said, "Sit down. This is going to take a while."
Right.
Well, we sat and talked for 2 hours. And then she went home. She told Andy, her husband, she said, "Oh, my God, this is such an interesting story. We should do something with him." He came to one of my lectures a couple weeks later, and he said, "You want to go to lunch?" And we went to a local restaurant, and we decided we wanted to do this documentary. We raised the money, and History Channel picked it up and put a lot more money into it, and that's how it happened.
Excellent.
And they were the ones that did the second movie, and they're the ones that did America Unearthed. And
hang on, what's the second movie called?
Who Really Discovered America?
Right, so you take the consequences of the first movie and you explore that further.
Correct. Yep, exactly.
You're probably familiar with the Norwegian scholar. He's dead now, but his name was Helge Ingstad.
Helge Ingstad. Yes, he and his wife really deserve credit for Lanza Meadows.
Yes, because he and his wife, I have a book of them, they documented, there can be no doubt. I don't know why this isn't in all basic school books, because there can be no doubt that the Vikings came to America.
It is starting
before.
It's starting to change now. That is really becoming the norm now. I mean, it is ridiculous. Actually, we did an episode of my show, America Unearthed, on Lanza Meadows, and my guest was Brigida Wallace. Do you know Brigida?
No.
She was the one that basically was the archaeologist back in the 1960s who worked with the Ingstads and made a lot of the important discoveries based on their initial research.
And you got her on the show. Wow.
Yeah, and I've known Brigida for a long time, because when I first got involved in the runestone, they had a special exhibition and a conference around just the runestone. And I spoke at that conference, and oh my God, you won't believe some of the stuff that happened there. Honest to God, I gave a lecture about my findings, right? This was in November of 2000. And this was when there was an exhibition going around the world at the time. It was just coincidental, called the North Atlantic Saga. And the Smithsonian Institution published a big volume that was like the book they were selling with the exhibition, going around to the different cities. And Brigida Wallace and William Fitzhugh at the Smithsonian, they were the ones that co-authored that book. And they wrote a chapter called about the North American runestones and the Kensington Runestone, the Spirit Pond, and all this. And it was real short. There were 29 factual errors that were just wrong. I mean, and it was just a hack job. So Brigida, when I met her at the conference, had a preconceived negative notion about the runestone. And of course, she treated me like I was this cute little boy that didn't really know what he was talking about.
Yeah, of course.
Very condescending. And I mean, it was insulting, right? And as you said before, archaeology is a soft science discipline, okay? I hate to break it to you, archaeologists, but, you use all these, words, scientific words, and we use proper scientific method. But you know what? The evidence shows that you don't. Okay.
Yeah, you're giving them too much credit calling it science. It's degenerated into a religion in many cases.
Well, exactly. And when you said that, I can say, look, brother, I have lived it, and I know exactly what you're talking about. But getting back to that conference early on, when I gave the presentation, I remember I walked in. I was with my wife and with the director of the Runestone Museum, who was there, and we brought the runestone to this conference so they could see it, right?
Oh, you actually were allowed to bring the stone itself?
Yeah,
Wow.
back then they were pretty loosey-goosey with it, not anymore.
Yeah, because they thought it was just crap anyway, right?
Well, look, I remember, how I had to take a core sample out of the back of it so I could make thin sections to properly identify the mineralogy, right? And I basically, people were like, oh my God, you're going to cut a hole in it? And I said, look, but by this time, right, I learned enough to know that it was considered a hoax. And I said, look, everybody considers this a hoax, right? Well, yeah. I said, okay, then you've got everything to gain and nothing to lose. Oh, yeah, go ahead. So I did. But when I went into that conference, I remember I went to the registration desk, and all I wanted to ask them is, what room am I speaking in, right? The state archaeologist at the time was the guy that I didn't know this at the time. I found out later he was the then state archaeologist. I walked up and I said, "Is Bill Fitzhugh? Not Bill Fitzhugh. It was oh God, what's his name? I'm drawing a blank." But I knew what his name was, but I didn't know what he looked like. So I asked somebody there, and they said, "Oh, he's right here." So he came walking up and he said, "Hello." And I said, yeah. I said, I'm Scott Wolter. I'm looking for the room. And he just turned and put his face up against the wall. I'm not kidding you. I am not making this up. My wife, he just turned.
Like theatrics? I don't understand. What's the...
No, he was, okay, so imagine you and I are face to face, right?
Yeah.
I told him my name, and then he just threw his head back, turned 90 degrees, and faced this little wall that was right next to the table. He wouldn't look at me.
Jeez.
And he goes, "You're in room 249 or whatever." And he just, my wife was standing right there. To this day, I cannot believe it. It was like, he didn't even know me.
Well, obviously your reputation had preceded you. But what did he do there? If he was so against it, why did he bother showing up?
Well, he was one of the organizers of this thing. It was an archaeological conference. So
and still he was one of the organizers, and still they invited you on?
Well, he wasn't the one that invited me. Somebody else did.
No, right.
And
yeah,
so anyway, so I gave the talk, and the thing was packed, right? And I had no idea. I still didn't really understand the gravity, although that experience I had just a few minutes earlier helped me understand a little bit. But I'll never forget when I got done, half the people in the room were like, "Oh my God, this changes history," and the other half were like, "Oh, this is a bunch of bullshit." And I had people coming up to me, and I'm like, "Well, it's a hoax, you know." I said, "Well, didn't you hear what I just said?" And other people came up and were like, "Oh my God, this is amazing." And it was black and white. It was bizarre. That's all I can.
It is, and I mentioned to you Petter Amundsen before we started, and he's had an exact same experience as you,
right.
Only in other fields of academia, especially because his thing is about codes and documents and literature. And my God, the dogma. And that's the good thing is it's so displayed in because they interview these people, and you don't have to know anything about the subject. You see the movies, you see the TV series, and it's obvious for everyone to see that we are dealing with a bunch of fanatics. emotionally based fanatics. And that kind of wakes people up to because, especially before, people used to think, oh, scholars, they know everything, right?
Yeah.
But we have to use the human evaluation. Nobody is gods on this earth, or everybody is gods, if you like. So exactly. we can't just elevate them due to a degree. We have to listen to the case. What is the work? What's it about? And then we have to consider all the human factors that you have been suffering from too.
Well, it was really an education for me. I fully understand it now, and it's too bad because we're really wasting a lot of time and knowledge. And, look, these people that we're talking about, they're not stupid people, right? They have their skills and they have their knowledge. And
but I think they have low, not IQ, but EQ, emotional intelligence.
Well, they're insecure in a lot of ways.
And look at your friend Graham Hancock. He's really been in the vanguard, in the trenches on this.
Yep. And he's taken a lot of criticism unfairly. And, there have been a couple times where I don't want to say that he reacted emotionally when he didn't need to, But at the same time, when people come after you, look, I'm an old ball player, right? I played football for years and I was a linebacker. I'm used to, if somebody challenges me, it's like, okay, let's go, right? And you can't do that. You have to
be the adult in the room.
Yeah, you have to be the adult, right? And I'm not used to that, So, but it really is what I call the human condition has more impact on our lives, on research and science than it should.
Yeah, and that people are aware of.
But it is what it is. It's just the way it is.
And I recommend all our listeners to Google or go to YouTube and check Graham Hancock's clash with. Actually, Hancock did nothing, but this psychopath, Zahi Hawass, typical representative.
Zahi Hawass,
Look at him go really unhinged, just exploding in the face of the facts Graham Hancock presents. Hancock is so measured and calm, at least in that instance.
Yeah.
And Hawass is just, the masks is falling off. That's what we're dealing with, folks. But truth will out.
Yes.
And the good thing with people like you, Scott, is that you are using this tool we call science. And as long as you stick to that, you will eventually win the battle against these.
Oh, I have no doubt. Look, the old phrase, the truth will eventually bubble to the surface. It always does, and I know it will in this case. And to be quite frank with you, Al, it's happening at a faster rate than I thought. I'm really starting to see some momentum. The show has been a real driver of that, and I appreciate so much having that opportunity and the people that have reached out to me. I just feel like there's a lot of really good things happening. And, for crying out loud, you said it before, a lot of this is driven by fear, right?
Mm.
Well, I don't really know what people have to fear. And if you're a true scientist, right, if new evidence comes in that dictates or indeed demands a new conclusion, you go there. And it doesn't mean that you're stupid if you had a previous conclusion. It means you didn't have the evidence you had before. And if the new evidence comes in and you accept it, that's a true scientist, right?
I agree.
That's the way it works. It doesn't mean you're stupid. It means you're smart. And so this is what I wish more of these people would understand. But they just don't, and it's too bad.
No, but the problem, and it's not just scientists, is that many people they don't have a genuine identification measure for themselves. They identify with their thoughts, with their ideas.
Yeah.
And so if something is, you see that very evident in Petter Amundsen's case too. So if something attacks, let's say you really believe that Will Shakespeare, the crook Will Shakespeare, authored the Shakespearean art.
Yeah.
Now,
that's
your, it's your bread and butter. It's what you've been written thesis on, and then some hack comes from another country even, and it shows you evidence. It's not so simple. they feel you might as well just go and kick them in the belly.
Yeah.
It's kind of, that's how it's an attack on their identification. It's not you're attacking ideas or dogmas or falsehoods. No, you're attacking them.
You take it personally. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, you talked about this archaeologist woman who worked with Ingstad. Let's backtrack to there.
Oh, Brigitte. Yeah.
She was present on your this infamous lecture of yours?
Yeah, she was there. She was there. I didn't know her. That was the first time I met her. And, you know, she was kind of a rock star to a lot of these archaeologists because she had worked on this famous site, right? Lonesome Meadows. And she was very charming. And, but I remember, I just thought of something. So after my lecture, which was the last lecture of the afternoon prior to the cocktail hour before dinner, and I wasn't going to stay for dinner because I was only there for the lecture, but I got invited to have a drink. So we went in there, my wife and I remember somebody brought me up to Brigitte Wallace. And I met Brigitte. And she didn't really know who I was at the time either, although she had just heard my lecture. And she was just beginning to talk to me about the lecture. Literally, and she was, and to her credit, she was very charming and she was engaging. And all of a sudden, and I'm telling you, Al, I'm not making this up, that state archaeologist that turned his head to the wall, he came swooping in, grabbed her by the back of the arm, went between her and I and my wife, and he just grabbed her and he said, "Come along, Brigitte, we have to eat now."
What a child.
And he whisked her off, and she just went, "What?"
Yeah.
It was like he had to rescue her from me.
Yeah. Oh, he's going to taint her. He's going to taint her.
Oh, my God. Guess what? We were just going to make small talk and get to know each other. If she asked me about the runestone, I would have answered her question. I wasn't going to bring it up. No. But this is a cocktail hour, right? This is a social thing. But no, I was too dangerous.
Yeah. She might even take a liking to you. And wow.
Oh, heaven forbid that.
Yeah. But did you get a notion of how she reacted to your info?
Yes, I did. Because years later, I went up to visit her on my own. And I visited her at her home up in Nova Scotia. And she was quite gracious. She and her husband welcomed me into their home. They made us a nice meal. But she just was very, she was nervous, and she just did not want to accept what I was there for. And I knew that there was a potential for conflict because she wasn't welcoming my research. She was very nice personally. I have nothing but good things to say about her personally, but she was very, she was not at ease talking to me, and she didn't really want to talk about the details of the runestone because she couldn't, right? But she was standing by her position that it was a hoax, and
Well, you know, she's an old-timer, and so she would know that you are finished if you step on certain dogmas. The history is full. We actually have another series, apart from this one that you're present in now, that has to do with the crisis of academia. And there's so many faiths. You know, sincere researchers who are naive and don't know that you can't swear in church. They become iconoclasts without intending it, you know.
Right.
And they're done for. They're dead in terms of career. But some of them, in private, they would admit,
sure.
This is interesting. But she didn't even do that.
Well, no, she wouldn't. No, she did not go there. She would not go there. And then years later, when we had her on the episode, we knew each other and we were cordial as on a personal level, but there was still that angst, about our professional journeys that we were on and what we believed to be. And I give her nothing but credit for Lonesome Meadows. And I said, well, could they have traveled farther south? And she said, yes. And I said, well, if they were here in the 10th and 11th centuries, why couldn't they have been here in the 14th century?
Exactly. It's such a small step.
Well, think about this, though, Al. Think about this. What academia wants us to accept is that the Vikings were here, like I said, in the 9th, 10th, maybe even the 11th centuries, right? 11th centuries. But then nothing happened for 500 years until Chris came over. I mean, think about that.
It's crazy.
That doesn't even pass that. I remember I did the math in my head and I go, 500 years, nothing happened. But these guys came over here multiple times on the northern route. Like they just gave up. They just said, "Oh, I guess we're not going to go there anymore." It just didn't make sense.
Well, there is one case for not 500 years of silence, but there was this small ice age.
Oh, sure.
In Bergen, my hometown, there was very popular in, I think it was in the 1600s. They were sitting in the tavernas discussing where the Greenland Vikings ended up.
Right.
Because back then they didn't know for sure. Most likely they went to further south, right, in America, because they didn't come back to Iceland.
Correct. Yeah.
So there is a case for having less traffic then, because the boats couldn't just cross directly across the
I know what you mean.
Atlantic. They had
to.
to.
They island hopped. You go to Rock Hall, you go to Iceland, you go to Greenland, and
Yeah, but there is this map that the Vikings, the Earl of Orkney, got it from the Vikings, and he was married, I think, into Colombus' family.
Yep, the Drummonds, yeah.
Yeah, so you know about this, right?
Columbus did, yeah.
Yeah, Columbus married into his. So obviously, if Columbus got this stuff, when was Columbus again? What was the year?
1492.
Yeah. So obviously it was still fresh, kind of. It wasn't like something he found in a godforsaken monastery somewhere far away, right?
Well, but back up a second here. Many people don't know this, but Columbus was in the North Atlantic. And for 30 days in 1477, he basically was missing, right? So the question is, where'd he go? Well, I think he went to the Western lands, just like Earl Henry Sinclair had already been. And the Templars had been multiple times prior to him.
So he probed it before he suggested to go there officially?
Well, he was definitely in the North Atlantic. There's no question about that. As far as Greenland, that's documented. But he was there for 30 days, and there's really no record, no mention of what he did up there.
And 30 days would be sufficient to go back and forth, right?
Oh, are you kidding me? Absolutely. Well, from Greenland, absolutely. I mean, it's a matter of a couple of days sailing across there. I mean, and one of the things that I learned about the North Atlantic route is, and I learned this from one of my guests on the show, and he said, look, if you have the right weather, he said, you can go from Iceland to Greenland and island hop from the Shetlands, the Orkneys, Rockall to Iceland to Greenland, and then to North America. If the weather is clear, by the time you get to the point where you can no longer see land from the boat in Iceland where you left, you can now see Greenland.
So you would have land kind of within a range all the time.
You'd be visually, if the weather is cooperative, right?
Yeah.
Which isn't often.
But what about the opposite? Wouldn't that be even easier? You could just surf the Gulf Stream back?
Well, yeah. I mean, I personally believe that there were ancient navigators that were going across the Atlantic,
Egyptians even,
going across all the oceans, and they understood these sea currents and the winds and all the different things that a sailor would understand. And I think that this is part of the knowledge that the Templars had, that was and the tradition that they came from, that was ancient.
I've speculated in this show that the Templars may have visited Oak Island even before they were banished and the fleet, because when the fleet escaped, no matter where they went, they would have to have like an idea of where they were going, right? And even if they parked in Portugal or Scotland before they really went to America, still they would have to have a pre-notion of They couldn't just, okay, let's see what's out there.
No. Let me tell you something. We have some documents that we're vetting right now that if they're authentic, and at this point things seem to be checking out. It talks about where the Scottish Templars brought treasure over, where they buried it, and when they recovered it. And I can tell you.
Oh, they recovered it too. Damn.
Yeah. Well, not all of it, but pretty most of it. But the point is that there were such detailed instructions as to where they left these treasures. They've been coming here. The tradition that they were a part of, the Templars were a part of, that goes back literally thousands of years. They were called something else in the past, but they knew all about the North America. They knew how to get there. They knew all of and they knew about the resources, and more importantly than anything, they knew about the indigenous people here that embraced a similar ideology as they did. And this is the reason why nothing happened, quote, for 500 years, because they came over here secretly. They didn't tell anybody. They didn't write it down in obvious places for people to find, because they got along with the natives over here. They shared
the Micmacs, right?
Well, the Mi'kmaq is up in. We say Micmac, they say Mi'kmaq. But the Mi'kmaq in Nova Scotia area for sure, and then you get into the other different Algonquin nations, the Ojibwa, the Potawatomi. There's all kinds of tribes that they interacted with, but they all have their own secret society. It's called the Medewin, and it's essentially Freemasonry.
And wasn't it in your movie Holy Grail in America that you show that the Mi'kmaq flag is actually a Templar flag?
Yep, it's just reversed, right?
Yeah,
one is on the east side, one's on the west side of the Atlantic.
And the Templars were already in conflict with the Pope, who was more or less had the power in Europe at the time, so they had to keep things under wraps.
Look, the formation of the Templars by what I call the Venus families, of which Bernard de Clairvaux, who joined the Templar Order in 1113 with 30 family members, including two of his uncles, who were some of those original knights that fought in the First Crusade. That event in 1113, when Bernard de Clairvaux joined the Cistercian order with 30 family members, at the first abbey at Citeaux, was what I call the greatest coup d'etat in history that nobody knows about, because he founded the first daughter abbey at Clairvaux, and by the time he died in 1158, there were over 300 Cistercian abbeys across Europe, into the Holy Land, and into Scandinavia. And I don't.
Yeah, sorry, I just have to say, one of those early Cistercian cloisters I've used with a spiritual group. Amazing architecture, and it's round, just like the Templar round churches.
Of course. And as you may or may not know, it was Bernard de Clairvaux who, in 1128, wrote the charter for a group called the Knights Templar, who were Cistercian monks, right? They just served a different function within the order. And in 1129, January of 1129, the Pope issued a papal bull making them an official order. But make no mistake, the tradition that they were existed long before they were an official order.
But how come the Cistercians managed to be, to some degree, independent of the Vatican?
Well, they for the simple reason that they pretended to be Catholic.
Yeah, but why weren't they like the Dominicans, or fully on board with all the horrors?
Well, look, the reason is because the Cistercians, the true Cistercian tradition, embraced a reverence of the sacred feminine, right? The feminine aspect of the Godhead. That is why Bernard had a fascination with the Virgin Mary, who was just a metaphor for the great goddess that they truly revered. And so the symbols that the Roman Church had adopted and had used to create this corporation, if you will, they just borrowed from older traditions and just spun a different story.
Yeah, that could bring us into the incredibly interesting story of the Celtic Church and how how Scandinavia become Christian. I have a friend who's a researcher who made a great book. Actually, I think I'm gonna send you his book because it's in English. I have 2 copies. I'll send you one of them. It's amazing stuff, man.
You read English, right?
Pardon?
You read English, of course.
Yes, sure.
Well, then why don't we trade books? I'll send you one of mine.
Yeah, let's do that. Great.
Okay, deal.
Yeah, but I want to give you a teaser so you know why I want to send it to you, because I think it's relevant for the context of your work.
Okay.
It's not a very well-known book, not just because it's a local Norwegian who has written it, but he's been so beaten up.
Right.
But it's called, in the English translation, is called The Viking Serpent, Secrets of the Celtic Church in Norway, their serpent worship, and Sacred Pentagram Geometry.
Oh, that'd be good. That would be good.
Now, here's the thing. He shows that the reason that the Vikings became Christians overnight, basically, was, if it was Catholicism, it would never have worked. But you know the Celtic Church. First off, they have their own tradition that Jesus actually came with Jacob, his father, long before the crucifixion.
To the British Isles.
Exactly. So they have that heresy.
Yep.
And they also have priests from Egypt and Syria who started basically the church very, very early on.
Right.
Even before the Catholics. So here's the thing he discovered. The Celtic Church was not crushed in the 600s, 700s.
Right.
They lingered on. Independent enclaves lingered on all the way to the 1100s.
Right.
And when they lost territory to the Catholics, because there was ever-going power battle, as you know, all over Europe, all sorts of.
Sure.
And what they did was that they sent their people and converted the Norwegians.
Oh, right.
And so the first Christians in Norway was Celtic, and it's so interesting because you can often read history from the. Through the eyes of your enemies, if they win, right?
Right.
Just like we know about Gnostics, basically through church fathers' condemnation, right?
Right.
And the same way here, there were papal bulls against the Norwegian churches up until they murdered a Norwegian archbishop and finally got their first foothold in Norway.
Oh, okay.
And the interesting thing is this overlaps with, to put it like this, the last independent Celtic church was in Norway.
Yeah.
And the last remnants of that lingered on until after the Kensington Runestone time.
All right.
So they were crushed I think in the 1200s, but fragment of it lingered on to the 1300s.
Right.
Basically, the Black Plague marks, the time between when stuff was interesting and when decay was fully. We lost the literal class, for example, people who could read and write.
Uh-huh.
And the Black Plague, 1349 in Norway to 1350.
Mm.
And I want to tell you another thing. A book that was written by a Norwegian professor, a historian. And it was like a jubilee book for the city of Bergen.
Okay.
So he didn't mean to write about what I'm going to tell you, but he was puzzled about it and mentioned it, but didn't have the context to understand it.
Okay.
Because he was a geek knowing everything about Bergen history. And here's the thing. It's the same thing. Read history through your adversaries. The church and the king were terrified by the, what you call guilds.
Oh, yeah.
Because although it was just the clerics and the nobility who could read and write, there was also, especially in Bergen, power pockets of educated men who were into crafts.
Right.
And they could read and write. which worried the secular powers of the king and his henchmen, because it meant potential revolution if you have a group of people who can read and write and have resources.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, the king was afraid they would plot political revolution, and the church was afraid they would plot spiritual revolution, because these men were accused of one interesting banishment from the church, where they say that these men, years before the Templars were officially founded, they had still doing Norse worship. This is in the year, when was the Templar founded? 1107?
Well, it officially 1128. The bull was, but they existed before that.
Yeah. And this was
January of 1129, officially.
Okay, so this was in the early 1100s. There were pockets of educated, practical men who still worked with runes and the Norse religion.
Wow.
Officially, the Norse religion was dead in the 1100s.
Yeah.
And the accusations against them, when you see how they describe it, it's just like a lodge and an order.
Oh, is that right?
And that's so weird, because I thought that started with the Templars.
No.
No, I mean, not a secret mystery school thing, but this way of guilds, temples, lodges, secret lore, initiation, stuff like that.
Right,
It was very reminiscent of Templars when I read it, or only they were doing Norse stuff. Now, here's the interesting thing. These problems lingered for 200 years, because you can read sporadic banishment and even laws declared. The king had to make new laws just to crush them.
Right.
And the last one was after the Templars were dissolved.
Okay.
So this proves at least one thing, and that is that it was possible to form esoteric brotherhoods who worshipped spiritual currents not approved by the church, all the way even before the Templars until after the Templars.
Believe me, I'm well aware of that.
If this could happen in remote, little, poor Norway, obviously this would also be able to go on in Scotland, in Portugal, in the Baltics, all over the place, right? Yeah,
absolutely. And the Cremona document has to be digested by people. And the Sinclair journals, there more and more information keeps coming to us, and it's just amazing. The gist of the message is very clear. And in fact, in our journals, it's clear that the Scots are practicing Celtic rituals, and they talk about them.
Right.
In some, I mean, these documents are just amazing. So no question that there's Celtic, the Celtic views are still being practiced. But what's interesting is they talk about the quote old religion and the new religion, and how they have to incorporate elements of both depending on who they interact with in their society. You know, the church was omnipresent, so the new religion, they had to be up on Catholicism, but it's clear that what was in their heart was their Celtic roots.
Yeah, and according to the chap who wrote the Viking serpent book I'm going to send you, he says that they were basically Gnostics, and they were celebrating what you call the sacred feminine. I don't think he used that description, but when you read it, you see it's the same thing.
Yeah, that's what it is. I know that's what it is, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, remember, the Cremona document, you got to read that. You need to read that.
I will. I know you used this document in your book, Akhenaton to the Founding Fathers.
Oh, yeah.
And this covers a huge part of the unknown history of the Templars.
It covers pretty much, that covers, part of what they discuss is a first-hand narrative of the six Templars that went under the south wall of the temple in Jerusalem and found a tomb. I don't believe they found anything. I think they knew exactly what they were looking for. But it describes the Templar treasure that was there. And the reason I say that was there, that treasure is not all of the treasure, because the Crusades, the main mission of the Crusades from the Templar standpoint was the Holy Land was a strategic outpost, if you will, a base of operations in the Middle East where they could go round stuff up. right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what their mission was. They didn't, and when the Templars were defeated, quote in quotes, in the latter part of the 12th century, that's BS. They gave it up because they were done. They had gotten everything that they wanted, and they turned their attention west.
Right. But let's go back to your story.
Sure.
Yep. So let's just complete the story of the Kensington Runestone.
Okay.
I've heard, like I said in the beginning, it's genuine. Oh, no, it's not genuine after all. And I have an acquaintance, I call him, because I wouldn't regard him as a friend, but he's like into runes and stuff, and he's one of these dogmatists that, no, they're Kensington Runestone, that's... they thought it was genuine, but it's not genuine after all. So what's the movements that been there because that makes people go back and forth on that?
Well, I think it has to do with which way the wind is blowing that day, because it's not a matter of evidence, it's not a matter of fact, and I have to tell you that the Templars were responsible for placing the Kensington Runestone as a land claim. There's no question about that, at least not in my mind. All the evidence points to them and only them. And the evidence trail that I followed led to the Cistercians, because on the island of Gotland, where almost every single piece of linguistic evidence was, there was only one clergy, the Cistercians. The Cistercians founded the Knights Templar Order. Bernard de Clairvaux, fact. And so it went straight to them and nobody else but them. And as it turns out, they had the means, they had the motivation, they had the money, and they had the knowledge. And so everything fits as it must if you have the correct answer. I do forensic investigations for a living, 35 years. I know how this works, okay? And so when somebody says to me that it's fake, I say, okay, tell me why. And when they start to rattle it off, well, you know what I usually hear? Well, everybody knows. What kind of evidence is that? That's not evidence.
It is known. That's what the superstitious people say.
Everyone knows, right? No, tell me specifically what it is that makes it a hoax. And I can guarantee you, there is not one scholar on this planet today that is going to be able to refute what we have with any evidence, because I can stick with them on the runes, the dialect, the grammar, the dating, everything. They will not...
Notwithstanding the geology of it.
Well, the geology they can't argue with me on because it's solid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But one of the things they tried to use in the beginning that gave you some problems, we're going to get back to that in part 2, but that's the mysterious hooked X.
Oh, yeah.
But we're going to get back to that. I don't want us to go there yet because let's
save that because the journey that I've taken with the hooked X is nothing short of amazing. And in my latest book, which just came out, I believe I have found the origin of it, that what the Templars discovered that convinced them that this was going to be the iconic symbol that would represent their mission, their ideology, their sacred symbol that would really represent them.
Nice.
And it's an amazing story. So
what's that book called?
The book is called Cryptic Code of the Templars in America, Origins of the Hooked X.
Okay. So we're going to get back to the Hooked X, and I'm going to air with you some old documents I have here on it, but we'll get back to that in part 2.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. By the way, the Kensington Runestone, what does it actually say when you translate it?
It says 8, and it's a pentatic numbering system that is found on the Kensington Runestone. This is one of the problems that the scholars had. I would mention to you that the pentatic numbering system is actually Arabic in origin. Okay, which begs the question: what is essentially a Muslim numbering system doing on a Scandinavian runestone? Right. Well, who interacted with Muslims?
Vikings
during medieval times. Well, how about the Templars?
Yeah, Templars
in the Holy Land, right? In any case, getting back to the inscription, it starts with the number 8. it says 8 Goths and 22 Northmen on this acquisition business / taking up land from Vinland far to the west. We had a camp near 2 shelters, 1 day's journey north from this stone. We were fishing one day. After we came home, found 10 men red from blood and death, and then 3 Latin letters, AVM. And then the last line says, save from evils. On the side of the stone, there are 3 more lines that say, there are 10 men by the inland sea to look after our ships, 14 days' journey from this island, year 1362.
Mm. The Norsemen, you said, you mean Norwegians?
Well, it says Northmen, Northmen.
That's what they called themselves back in the day.
Well, and based on some other information that we have, I would think that Norwegians is probably correct.
Yeah. So back to the stone. So you had a lot of scholars there, and you managed to sway some of them, but although I do appreciate you assert that the geological evidence shows that it's original. That's fine. And by the way, has any other geologists looked into it and reached a different conclusion from you?
No.
Okay.
No. The only other geologist that has done meaningful work on the runestone was the first state geologist of Minnesota. His name was Newton H. Winchell. And in 1909, he was recruited by the Minnesota Historical Society Museum Committee to conduct a study on the stone. And he wrote a 76-page report. And in there, he talked about doing some relative age weathering studies, which is exactly what I did. And remember, when I did my work, I did not know about Winchell. I knew who he was, but I didn't know that he had worked on the Kensington Runestone. And I was quite surprised to find that out. And I was a little worried at first because I thought, oh God, what if he came to a different conclusion? Well, in that 76-page report, in fact, I can tell you verbatim what he wrote. The last sentence he wrote was, the said stone is not a modern forgery and must be accepted as a genuine record of exploration in Minnesota at the date stated in the inscription. And I remember when I read that, I just went, whew. I was relieved, right? But the more I thought about it, the more I decided that all I did was independently replicate what he already did. And that's the way it works in science. So the only other guy who looked at it 90 years before I did came to the same conclusion that I did.
Yeah. So that's the hard evidence. Now, what I was getting at was that the pseudo-skeptics, who, of course, we all know that in any controversial issue that goes against authority or their established materialism paradigm, they have to knee-jerk take the opposite, and then they try to look for evidence to support their opposite. So this is an anti, or at least it's a non-scientific approach.
Correct.
And of course, here you went against the establishment, you went against the established view that Vikings couldn't have had anything to do in Kensington at that time. Ergo, they had to try to find something to cling to, because they need a semblance of a scientific excuse at least. And so they have heavily relied on linguistics, etymology, which isn't, like I have to just say to my listeners, in case anyone don't know, it isn't a hard science, meaning knowledge change all the time. We learn new stuff. There's wrong interpretations. There's lack of sources. It's not a fixed, it's not an either or thing. Like in hard science, you can examine something, you can investigate it, and you can determine it. Of course, there's also gray areas and nuances there too, but this is really, it's like archaeology, right? It's more to do with who's doing it than actually the craft itself. And one of their big deals is the word oppdagelse, or oppdagelsesferd. That means voyage of discovery. I've looked into it, and Actually, all three words are Norse. We have dagr, still used in Iceland, which means day. We have ferd, still used in Norway, meaning journey, voyage. And we have up, which means up.
Right.
Now, the only trouble is that the combination of these words, meaning a voyage of discovery, as far as, and I haven't researched this very deep, but they say that the earliest examples is from Germany, a little later than the 1300s. But this is just where we're at right now. It's not written in stone, and other stuff they claimed was not possible. You had to, if I understand you correctly, there were similar dogmas. You went to Scandinavia, you verified that it was wrong, you debunked those dogmas, right?
Well, yeah, they would not agree, but that's fine. I mean, and by the way, can I just go back for a sec? You talked about Abdaga. One of the things that Dick Nielsen and Henrik Williams discovered is that the thorn rune, which represents the D sound, I'm trying to remember the rule, and it's there was something that they discovered that was medieval, and the word is not Abdag el Safar, and I'm not pronouncing it right, but it's actually a T sound as opposed to a D sound. So it's Abtaga, which changes it from journey of discovery to journey of acquisition or taking up land.
Ah, that makes sense. That do make sense. I mailed a friend of mine. Unfortunately, he didn't get back to us before the show, but I'm anticipating his answers. He's Icelander.
Yeah.
And he's an expert in runes and in etymology, symbolism, language. He doesn't know why I've asked him this, but I've asked him about this word. Can he check Icelandic records for how far back these three words goes, especially in combination? Because this is a very fragile field. You can't rest a dogma about history upon such a fragile field as linguistics, because we have so little sources. And the Black Plague is the big problems, because the Norse elite in Norway was wiped out. After that, we had to import nobility from Denmark and Sweden, because most people who could read and write was wiped out. And of course, the Black Plague was in the period 1348 to 1350 in Norway. And so it's interesting, because if you want to look for a possibility of a journey in, when was it again, 1362?
1362, but the party, according to the records we have, left Norway in 1358.
58 even. That's so interesting, because we know it was mixed company, Swedes and Norwegians. And that would fit. After the Black Plague, Norway had to rely on Swedes and Danish. So it would make very... And another thing, when you have Goths and Norsemen mixed like this, obviously the language being spoken, first off, people have to understand it's a very fluid language. It's not like today, everything has a rule. We know this from our shows on the Shakespeare mystery. You know, the way the Shakespeareans plays, Shakespeare actually defined a lot of rules. Yeah. But even he himself used several versions of how, because the written language wasn't fixed. And the same is even more so true for the Norse language back then. And so you would expect when they're Swedes and Norwegians, they would be more prone to use pop words or contemporary words imported from a bigger scene than just, you know, a local village in Norway, if you see what I mean.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
You know, there's even, they don't consider the fact that after 1319, I think it was, there was a mixed dialect spoken by Norwegians and Swedes in those areas where they hanged. It is called Old Buhulandsk or something like that.
Right.
But I'm not sure that word would figure there, but nonetheless. But even even disregarding that, these are travelers, and in mixed company they're forced to use common words to understand each other because they're Swedes and Norwegians.
Yeah.
And probably Swedes and Norwegians from different places even. And Norway has the more dialects, meaning versions, variations of the language than any other language on earth compared to the population.
Oh, okay.
Has to do with huge areas, sparse populated, so local variations will develop.
Right.
And this again is an argument for words like oppdagelsesferd and others that they mean couldn't be used back then, could be used back then, due to these sober facts I've said.
Well, and you know, the way you're presenting it is fine, but remember, from my point of view, the stone told me that it is authentic. Therefore, it's not this could have been used. It had to have been used because the stone says so. You follow what I'm saying?
Exactly. Yeah. And so a real scientist would try to find out how would these words be used back then if we think they couldn't be used back then. You see what I mean?
Uh-huh.
And this discovery of opptage instead of oppdage, changing the meaning makes a lot of sense. And so I would expect any word they would throw at you from that stone that could be controversial would mean a revision in the science of linguistics, basically.
In the known record of linguistic for Old Swedish in this case.
Just another source, improving our
understanding,
knowledge base if they were scientific.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, last point before we take a break here.
Okay.
In the Curse of Oak Island, this TV show, they have had some decent researchers on, and they have proven connections, not just in Oak Island, but New Ross, the whole area where Templars have come from France, they have come from Portugal, and even Viking Templars.
Yeah, or Scandinavian Templars, yeah.
Yeah, because they were still Vikings even after they were Christianed.
Yeah, I would call them Norse at that point. And,
Norse, okay.
And the reason I say that is because in where I live here, in the Kensington Runestone is a big part. Well, that's the biggest part. That's how I got started in this whole thing. But, for over a century, people equated that with Vikings, meaning from the Viking area, pre-Christian, and that's just not the case.
Yeah, they imagine people with horns on their helmet and stuff, right?
Yeah, I know that nonsense. Yeah, but,
it's just nonsense.
But it was these Norwegian Templars that created the runestone because the Kensington party is mentioned in these documents.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so don't we have other Templar evidence? Let Oak Island rest for now. But apart from that, isn't there plenty of evidence of Vikings and Templars, like as Norsemen having visited America?
Absolutely.
If this was an odd one out, would be one thing, but isn't it in fact, even after the Norse ruins discovered in Newfoundland in 1961? And by the way, the Norse were so familiar with America that they had their own words, their own names for many parts, like Labrador was called Markland.
Yeah.
or Vinland is obviously well known. But pardon? Friesland, another.
Yeah.
Although, isn't Friesland this sunken? Anyway, let's not even go there.
Yeah, I'm just going by memory. I could be wrong.
Yeah, but you have different, even other runestones in America, which are there, be them authentical or not. I see from Wikipedia stuff like, maybe you can comment on some of these, but Oklahoma runestone.
Well, that's the Heavener runestone, which I have seen. I've been down there. We did an episode on it on the show.
Okay.
Then you have the Narragansett runestone, which I saw the day before yesterday.
That's the one you sent me pictures of in Rhode Island.
That's in Rhode Island. And then we have In Hoc Signo Vinci stone, which we also looked at 2 days ago.
Where is that?
No, we looked at that yesterday. That's right. It was the 21st.
So where is it?
That one is located on the beach in Newport. It's in Latin. Wow. And we did an episode on that one that was in an episode that we filmed this year.
When Scott says episode, he's referring to his show America on Earth. We're going to discuss that in part 2.
Yeah.
Then you have the Spirit Pond runestones, right?
Yes.
In Maine.
There's 3 of them. Actually, there were 4. The 4th one was a pendant, but that one disappeared. That's Walter Elliott, who discovered the stones in a cluster. He kept that as a personal item, but he turned the other 3 stones over, and they're currently in the Maine State Museum, and they don't even let people look at them because they're such fakes, but they're absolutely not fake.
Oh, okay. I get it. What about the Verendry runestone in the Great Lakes?
Pardon me?
Found west of the Great Lakes in 1730. I don't know how you pronounce it. Verendry runestone? Verendry?
Oh, Le Brandre stone. No, that's not a runestone. That's a French land claim plaque.
Well,
that was now in South Dakota. Oh, you're thinking of the Le Brandre stone that was found in the column.
Yeah.
Up high by
Pierre Gaultier.
Yes, the Le Brandre stone.
Yeah.
But we don't know for sure what that was carved in. All we know is there's a statement that they look like Tartar characters.
Okay.
And those characters, I think it's Tartar script, and that looks a lot like runes, and I think it probably was runes.
Yeah, right. Or it could be one of the other people who went west. Egyptians have been in America. Everyone has been there, basically. So, of course, if we had this frequent traffic, then there should be precedents. And there is, Thor Heyerdahl.
Oh, yes. In fact, Thor Heyerdahl wrote me a note the year before he died.
Wow.
I'll never forget it. I met his Per Lillestrand. Have you ever heard of him?
Yeah. Because, before he died, he was into very interesting work. But what he's known for, of course, is to debunk these dogmas that, this people X could not get from A to B because it was impossible.
Yep.
He even showed that with the primitive seafaring tools that they had, the different people around the world, they could get either it was on rivers or there was across the Pacific, huge distances in primitive boats, making the Viking boats look like UFOs in comparison. So,
yeah, exactly.
So the point is, he knew this was possible, and after him, we all had to concede. Okay. So it's possible.
Well,
now,
yeah, exactly.
We know that the Vikings did back and forth. By the way, the work he did work on at the end was that the runes, the origin of the runes is pretty interesting, because it says that Odin noticed that the other people had a magical, and we'll get to this in part 2, by the way.
Yeah.
They had a magical language. They had tools to communicate with the gods and stuff. And he was referring obviously to the hieroglyphs and to the Hebrew and all the ancient holy alphabets. And so he wanted something similar for them. Now we know,
right,
and Thor Heyerdahl was a part of this work, that Odin actually was a tribe's head. He was an actual historic person. They originated in the area around the Black Sea, and they went as a part of the migration period all the way to Scandinavia eventually, as the ice caps were withdrawing. And so,
right,
so the runes are from the get-go a spiritual. It's not just, a practical thing. It's a spiritual thing.
Right.
And we'll get to this in part 2, which we actually have to go to now because of the time. Is there any other thing you want to say about the rune stone before we wrap up part 1?
Well, I think what I would say is what I wrote in my book, is that the beginning of the founding of the United States of America didn't begin in 1776. It officially began in 1362.
I'm with you there. And we're closing up to the break.
Okay.
But at the end of part 1 here, just to go back on track here, what about the Elbow Lake runestone? Is that a hoax, or is that?
No, that one. It's not a hoax. It's modern. It's just a modern stone. It was, and the guy who carved it admitted it.
Oh, okay. So
a hoax is something designed.
I know. But they call it a hoax in Wikipedia. So pseudo-skeptics rule Wikipedia. So
well, Wikipedia is garbage, okay?
I know. Let's not even go there. We're going to have shows on it. We talked about it before. Everybody knows.
Yeah, okay.
What about the AVM? And I usually say to my listeners, use Wikipedia on anything that, if there's not a shred of controversy, like how do you spell a word, then use Wikipedia.
Yeah. Or it's the United States in the Northern Hemisphere or the Southern Hemisphere. They'll probably get that right.
Right. Because as soon as there is a controversy, you can be sure one of the interested parties, are controlling the information.
Absolutely.
That's the problem. So you have the AVM runestone. What about that?
Now, if there is such a thing as a hoax runestone, it's that one, because that stone was carved by some academics who had became inspired by Anatoly Lieberman's spirited lecture about the Kensington Runestone hoax. So these guys went up and camped, these archaeology students, and they went up and camped at the park on the Oman Farm, which is now a Douglas County park, back in the 1990s, I think it was. In any case, it was 17 years prior to the discovery, so that would have been 2001, would have been in the early 80s. But anyway, they carved this AVM, 3 other runes, I'm not sure what they were trying to say, and then 1363, right? And geologically, that one did not do well. And they admitted later on when it was found that they had carved it to see if anybody would find it. Well, if anything is a hoax, it's the academics that perpetrated a hoax.
Yeah.
That was designed.
Yeah. This is like, now we're going to prove that the Kensington Runestone is a hoax by, launching this hoax, and everybody will fall for it. But it was revealed, right? Easy to reveal.
Oh yeah, everybody knows. I've written all about it. But here's the thing: this was created with the intention to deceive.
Yeah.
So it's ironic that it's the academics that are always claiming that other people are perpetrating hoax, but the only ones we know for sure that did perpetrate a hoax were academics.
Right.
Isn't that ironic?
It is. But, black is white and white is black. Now,
exactly.
What about the main penny? Interesting, it's a coin from Norway showing Olav Kyrre, who reigned 1067 to 1093, which would mean Vikings or whatever.
Right. Well, as far as I understand, the provenance of the discovery, it's in a clean archaeological context. So it's not a hoax, right? But the explanation is, to keep the paradigm intact, is that it's some type of a trade item that came over much later. Well, how did it get over here? Did it get here by Amazon? I mean, somebody brought it over here, right?
Yeah.
And it may have been traded amongst natives for a generation or 2 or 3. Who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe not.
But the fact is it came over. That's the point.
Right. I guess. Yeah, exactly. So.
And what about the Beardmore relics?
I'm not sure what to say about those, because those things disappeared, didn't they?
Oh, okay. That I don't know. I'm not too familiar in detail. But what I do know is that they have found lots of rune stones and Viking remnants in the Nova Scotia area.
Absolutely.
So, and some of them are featured in the Oak Island show.
Yeah.
So it doesn't just rest on the Kensington.
Oh God, no.
Okay, then I don't see what the big deal is.
Well, the big deal is that people don't like the Templars, most notably the Roman Catholic Church, which a lot of people in America have forgotten that it is not the state religion. We don't have a state religion. Right. But let's just put it this way: a lot of the pushback on the Kensington Runestone and the Templars in America have to do with religion and politics.
Yeah. Which is still with us, unfortunately.
Oh, it's not going anywhere.
No. Well, we'll go somewhere. We'll go take a coffee break and toilet break.
Oh, okay.
And when we come back in part 2, folks, we're going to delve deeper into the more esoteric and interesting aspects of this saga. Don't go anywhere.
I can't wait.
All of our files are free, and will remain free. If you like the show, you can show support by donating $1 to help with expenses. Just use the PayPal link on our website, YouTube channel, or Facebook page. Thanks.